person who's written a song tends to be the one person who sees that one song all the way through, from the idea they have in their head at first.
Queen's crew members kept a disturbing secret for decades. They witnessed John Deacon's shocking behavior backstage that would have ended careers if it ever got out. Even Freddie Mercury was stunned by what the Quiet One did during live shows. But that wasn't the worst part. By 1991, Deacon was drinking heavily and showing signs of a complete mental breakdown. The band was falling apart, and it wasn't just because of Freddie's illness. Now, at 73, Deacon has finally revealed what really drove him to the edge and why he's been hiding the truth all these years. John Richard Deacon's life began with a heartbreak that would follow him quietly for years. Born on August 19, 1951, in Leicester, England, he lost his father when he was still a boy. His mother, Molly, suddenly had to raise John and his sister Julie on her own in a post-war Britain where money was tight and every day meant a new challenge. Those early years taught John the weight of responsibility long before most children ever face it. While other boys his age could simply dream, John had to stay grounded, and it gave him a maturity that would later make him stand out. That calm, steady nature became his shield, and in time, his greatest strength. Beneath the quiet exterior, though, was a mind that seemed made for invention. At Chelsea College in London, John studied electronic engineering with a focus that stunned his professors. He graduated with first-class honors in 1971, something only a small fraction of students ever achieved. His lecturers believed he had the talent to reshape modern electronics, and job offers rolled in from major companies. One research position at Millard would have given him a salary far higher than what most musicians were making in those years. Even as a student, he was designing circuits and sound systems that left professionals amazed. Had he chosen differently, he might have gone on to change the technology world instead of music. But for John, the pull of music was too strong to ignore. That pull had already shown itself years earlier when he was just 14. He and a group of school friends formed a band called The Opposition, eager to make their mark. Local clubs wanted to pay them to perform, and the group quickly started earning more than most teenagers could dream of. But John's mother, protective and cautious, refused to let him play in late-night venues. She wanted her son safe and focused on school, not wandering into smoky clubs filled with strangers. So John found ways around her rules. He told her he was studying at a friend's house while sneaking off to rehearsals. It was risky, but it was the only way to keep chasing the music he loved. The Opposition might have stayed small, but the secret thrill of balancing his mother's expectations with his own passion taught John how to live in two worlds at once, something that would later prove vital in Queen. The real turning point came not from a performance, but from a small homemade invention. Using scraps from his college lab and an old television speaker, John built a little amplifier for less than 8 pounds. It didn't look like much, but when Brian May plugged his guitar into it, the sound was unlike anything they had ever heard. Warm, rich, and alive in a way no commercial amp could deliver. It created the tone that would carry some of Queen's most iconic songs. That tiny box, later called the DC amp, became irreplaceable. More than 50 years later, Brian May still uses it. Engineers have studied it for decades, but none have managed to recreate its magic. Few fans know it, but that quiet, practical bassist had given Queen a sound the world would never forget. Even so, John nearly never joined Queen at all. When he first saw them perform, he wasn't impressed. He thought their style was a bit much and even started his own band instead, focusing on more technical music that better matched his skills. For a while, it seemed like that was the path he would take. But when his guitarist left for another opportunity, John reluctantly agreed to audition for Queen. On February 20th, 1971, at Imperial College London, he played a steady bass line, said almost nothing, and left without fuss. He wasn't flashy, he didn't compete for attention, and in a band full of big personalities, that was exactly what they needed. From the start, his silence became his secret weapon. Other bassists had tried to stand out, clashing with Freddie Mercury's vision, but John simply supported the music. In the studio, he stayed quiet until he had something worth saying. And when he did, the band listened. He wasn't interested in being in the spotlight. He was interested in making the music better. That balance gave Freddie, Brian, and Roger the space to shine, while John quietly held everything together. Not everything came easy. On Queen's first album, management convinced him to use the name Deacon John, claiming it sounded more like a blues legend. For John, it felt fake, and seeing it in print left him shaken. He later demanded his real name back and never let anyone make that choice for him again. From then on, he avoided the tricks and games of the music business as much as possible. What most fans never realized was just how much John brought beyond his bass. He could play piano, guitar, and even double bass, teaching himself instruments with surprising speed. He quietly slipped rhythm guitar parts into hits like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, and when he wrote Another One Bites the Dust, he introduced Queen to a funk groove that became one of their biggest successes. John Deacon was still a teenager when he met Veronica Tetzlaff at a disco in 1971. At the time, Queen was just starting out and far from famous, while Veronica worked as a nanny at a teacher training college. The two fell for each other quickly and stayed together through the band's earliest years, when money was tight and life was uncertain. After 4 years of dating, they married in January 1975 in a small ceremony. Their bond turned out to be one of the most lasting romances in rock music, and John even wrote "You're My Best Friend" as a tribute to her. The song became a huge hit and helped define Queen's breakthrough. For more than 50 years, Veronica has kept a low profile, avoiding the spotlight despite being married to one of the world's most famous bassists. Around the same time, Queen nearly fell apart. Even with songs like Killer Queen on the charts, the band was barely making enough to live. Brian May rented a small bedsit, Freddie Mercury lived in a damp flat, and John was struggling to support his new wife. When John asked Queen's management company for a $4,000 advance to buy a house, he was flatly refused. That rejection opened his eyes to how badly the band was being treated. Despite their success, they were each receiving only $60 a week, while their managers kept the profits. The refusal pushed John to dig into the band's finances, and what he discovered led Queen to leave their management after a long legal battle. They had to pay a heavy price to buy out their contract, but it gave them the freedom to take control of their careers. Without that moment, Queen might not have survived. Through all the chaos of life in a rock band, John managed something almost unheard of. He and Veronica raised 6 children together, keeping their home life separate from the whirlwind of fame. While Freddie Mercury threw extravagant parties and Roger Taylor was known for his love of the fast life, John kept things quiet and steady. Their home in Putney became a safe place, and Veronica formed close friendships with the partners of the other band members. Even during the busiest touring years, John made sure his family was protected from the glare of the media. To this day, none of his children have spoken publicly about their father, proof of how carefully he guarded their privacy. Fans were stunned when John was caught drink driving in 1985. Known as the most level-headed member of Queen, he was stopped in London's West End after leaving a Phil Collins concert and failing a breathalyzer test. He had just bought a Porsche after the band's huge Rock in Rio success, a flashy change from his usual modest cars. The arrest cost him his license for a year and left him traveling the London Underground without anyone recognizing him. Brian May even joked on the radio by dedicating Stevie Wonder's "Don't Drive Drunk" to him. Embarrassed, John soon sold the Porsche and returned to more practical choices. The incident stood out because it was so unlike him. In interviews, John was refreshingly honest about how he saw his role as both a musician and a father. In one conversation in Japan in 1981, when asked about having children, he admitted he felt very responsible and wanted life to be as simple and easy as possible. At the time, he already had 3 young children, and his words showed that for him, family came first. While his bandmates often leaned into the wild side of fame, John used music as a way to provide stability. He also became the band's unofficial financial advisor after their early management troubles, keeping a careful watch on their business affairs. This sense of responsibility played a big role in his decision to step away from music after Freddie Mercury's death, choosing a quiet life with his family instead of continuing in the spotlight. John's journey as a songwriter began in an unusual way. In 1974, Brian May was hospitalized with hepatitis during the recording of Sheer Heart Attack. John stepped in and wrote a song called "Misfire," giving it a light Caribbean feel that stood out from the band's usual hard rock sound. He didn't just write it, he played most of the guitar parts himself, something he had never done before. The track gave Queen a new dimension and marked the start of John's growth as a songwriter. 6 years later, he would write the song that made Queen a household name in America. Another one, "Bites the Dust," was inspired by the funk sound of Chic, and its bass line carried the song to the top of the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks. It became a massive crossover hit, climbing not only the rock charts, but also the R&B and disco charts. The single sold millions of copies and became Queen's best-selling song. What made it even more remarkable was that its success was never part of the plan. It was a risk that ended up giving the band an entirely new audience. What many didn't realize was that John was also the band's hidden link to pop and Motown. While Brian and Roger leaned toward rock and Freddie brought theatrical flair, John drew inspiration from artists like Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson. His songs often carried a warmth and accessibility that balanced Queen's more dramatic material. Tracks like "I Want to Break Free" and "You're My Best Friend" reflected this influence and have remained timeless. Critics later noted that his songs often aged better than some of the more extravagant Queen numbers, giving the band a consistent thread of mainstream appeal. John's talents went far beyond the bass. He played guitar, piano, and keyboards on several records, adding layers that fans never realized were his. He built the famous DC amp from scraps of electronic equipment, which Brian May used to create the unique guitar sounds that defined Queen's style. Yet John was the only member who never sang backing vocals, making him both the most versatile and the quietest member of the group. Perhaps his most important role came behind the scenes. After Queen broke free from their old management, John took charge of their financial decisions. He handled contracts, checked expenses, and kept the band's money secure. The others trusted him completely, and his careful planning helped Queen grow into one of the most successful bands in the world. Most people saw John Deacon as the quiet, reserved bassist of Queen, but behind the scenes, his behavior sometimes shocked even the crew. During the band's live shows in the 1970s and early 1980s, he became known for a strange stunt that no one outside the inner circle ever really talked about. Crew members recalled what they called his ball-flashing trick, a wild move he would pull on stage during certain songs. Even Freddie Mercury encouraged him once, after they decided not to use inflatable props in Italy. The story spread quietly among those who worked with the band, showing that the quiet man of Queen had a rebellious side that clashed with his calm public image. Away from the stage, Deacon carried a heavy burden that grew impossible to hide. By the time he was 24, he was supporting 6 children while also managing Queen's business affairs. It was more than just playing bass. He was the one who had to make sure the money was handled and the band's future stayed secure. That responsibility weighed hard on him, especially as the 1980s brought both commercial pressure and Freddie Mercury's declining health. Former associates said he seemed close to a nervous breakdown by 1991. When Mercury died later that year, the guilt and stress grew so crushing that he withdrew almost completely from public life. Brian May and Roger Taylor later described him as fragile, and his final recording session in 1997 felt like torture to him. For John, the responsibility that once gave him purpose had finally broken him. Signs of the strain had been there long before Freddie's death. During interviews in Japan in 1981 and again in 1982, he already looked uncomfortable and tired. By 1982, he was drinking heavily, with one witness remembering a party in 1986, where Deacon quietly slipped under the table after drinking too much before returning to his chair. His calm, almost shy presence made it easy for people to miss the depth of the depression that was slowly overtaking him. His songwriting also faded as the years went on. After Queen released The Miracle in 1989, something changed. For the first time, all the songs were credited simply to Queen rather than to the individual members. Deacon co-wrote just 3 songs with Freddie: The Miracle, Rain Must Fall, and My Baby Does Me. When Innuendo followed in 1991, his contributions were even smaller. The perfectionist in him clashed with the band's push toward radio-friendly music, and he quietly withdrew from writing altogether. Even in group settings, he pulled back. By the mid-1980s, he rarely joined interviews or promotional appearances, letting Freddie, Brian, and Roger take the spotlight. Roger Taylor once admitted they hardly heard a word from him for years, and Brian May later said, "I haven't heard a squeak from John." His retreat from the band's social life was so noticeable that Taylor half-jokingly called him a sociopath in 2007, though he clarified that Deacon still gave his blessing for them to continue under the Queen name. His health, too, was quietly falling apart. He dealt with private medical issues during the 1980s that were never made public, while Veronica, his wife, grew more worried about the toll Queen's demanding schedule was taking on him. The pressure of raising 6 children while touring the world only made matters worse. He turned more to alcohol, and the depression that had haunted him deepened, often leaving him too drained to face the spotlight. A perfectionist by nature, Deacon became trapped in a painful conflict. He wanted Queen to stay true to the sound they had built in the 1970s, but the industry was pushing them toward faster, more commercial material. He obsessed over the smallest details of sound quality, but the pace of recording left him constantly unsatisfied. Hot Space in 1982, with its disco and funk influences, was a breaking point for him. He couldn't balance his standards with the reality of what the band needed to survive, and by the late 1980s, his creativity had nearly shut down completely. Then came the phone call that changed everything. On November 25, 1991, he learned that Freddie Mercury had died the night before at age 45 from bronchial pneumonia caused by AIDS. For Deacon, this wasn't just the loss of a bandmate. It was the loss of the one person who truly understood his quiet nature. Mercury had often said, "Don't underestimate him. He's got a fiery streak under all that." Without Freddie, Deacon believed there was no point in Queen continuing. He said it himself. As far as we are concerned, this is it. The following year, at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert at Wembley, he could barely hold himself together. Before 72,000 fans and more than 1 billion watching on television, he stood on stage visibly nervous, chain-smoking backstage, and struggling to get through the performance. When he finally spoke, his short line, "The show must go on," carried a weight that everyone could feel. It was clear that continuing without Freddie was breaking him. He tried one last time in Paris on January 17, 1997, performing "The Show Must Go On" with Brian, Roger, and Elton John at a ballet for AIDS awareness. He was 45 then, and right after leaving the stage, he told his bandmates he couldn't do it anymore. Brian and Roger were stunned, but they knew he meant it. That October, he recorded one final song with them, "No One But You, Only the Good Die Young." After that, he retired completely. The bond he had with Freddie explains why the loss cut so deep. While May and Taylor were more comfortable with fame, Freddie was the one who protected Deacon from the spotlight. They balanced each other perfectly. Mercury's flamboyance on stage and Deacon's steady presence behind him. After Freddie was gone, Deacon couldn't find a way to continue. For him, Queen had always been the four of them together, and once that was broken, the magic was gone. He had wanted to keep going at first, even appearing at a few charity concerts in the early 1990s. He joined the band for Made in Heaven in 1995, which became Queen's highest-selling studio album. But each time he stepped on stage without Freddie, it grew harder instead of easier. In October 1997, John Deacon walked into a London studio for what would quietly become the last time he recorded with Queen. The song was "No One But You, Only the Good Die Young," a heartfelt tribute to Freddie Mercury and Princess Diana. Those present noticed something different about him. Producer David Richards later said Deacon barely spoke between takes, and engineer Joshua McCrae remembered that the moment he finished his part, he packed up his bass, muttered, "That's it," and left without fanfare. The song went on to bring in millions, yet Deacon took no part in promoting it. For him, that recording was the end of the road. Just 2 months later, he sat down with Brian May and Roger Taylor at Taylor's home. What followed, according to May, was the most brutally honest conversation they had ever shared. Deacon told them he was completely finished with the music industry, calling it morally bankrupt and spiritually empty. He admitted he couldn't stomach the commercialization of Freddie's legacy or the pressure to keep pretending it mattered. The meeting lasted less than an hour. He refused to talk about future projects, rejected any plans for tours or merchandise, and asked that his name be removed from all promotion going forward. That day, he walked away from tens of millions of pounds, ending Queen as the four-piece they had been since 1971. Though he vanished from the stage, he never left Queen's business entirely. Through lawyers and trusted managers, Deacon kept a strong hand in the decisions that shaped the band's legacy. He controlled whether documentaries, musicals, or films could go forward, and his approval was even required for the release of Bohemian Rhapsody in 2018. He never spoke to May or Taylor directly, but the business arrangement ensured he remained an unseen partner while securing him a fortune that quietly grew into hundreds of millions. Over the years, promoters dangled staggering offers in front of him. He turned down a £25 million guarantee for a single Rock and Roll Hall of Fame show, rejected a chance to play at Live 8 for $12 million, and ignored invitations to the Olympic Games and major tribute concerts. His response was always the same: silence. Even charity events honoring Freddie could not bring him back. To those who kept asking, the message became clear. His musical career was closed for good. What he chose instead was a different kind of life. In 1997, with his youngest son only 8, he decided to step away from everything and focus on being a father. He moved his family into a comfortable but unflashy home in Putney, trading a mansion for a modest house, where neighbors knew him simply as John. He went to school plays, football matches, and parent meetings, the kind of everyday moments he had missed during Queen's touring years. His 6 children grew up outside the glare of fame, and today, not one of them has a public presence tied to music. He became a grandfather, and those close to him say his greatest joy now comes from family gatherings, where he'll sometimes sit at the piano, though never to play the songs that made him famous. The home in Putney became his fortress. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary, but inside, it was his shield from the world. He lived like a regular neighbor, picking up newspapers, chatting politely if someone recognized him, and then slipping back into a life that kept him invisible. It was a strategy that worked. For nearly 3 decades, he has managed to remain both immensely wealthy and completely private. Behind the scenes, however, his influence never fully disappeared. When Queen sold their catalog to Sony Music in 2024 for more than $1 billion, his signature was required. He still co-owns Queen Productions, and the royalties from the songs he wrote, especially Another One Bites the Dust, You're My Best Friend, and I Want to Break Free, continue to generate millions each year. Michael Jackson himself once pushed Freddie to make Another One Bites the Dust a single, and history proved him right. That song alone reshaped rock music, with its funk-inspired rhythm, influencing generations of artists. Brian May has often spoken about his deep respect for Deacon's choice. He admits the industry has changed so much that John likely wouldn't want to face the stress of it today. May has said Deacon's decision wasn't about abandoning the band, but about protecting his own peace of mind after Freddie's death, a loss that left him unable to imagine Queen without him. Psychologists believe he may have developed a form of performance anxiety tied to grief, which made stepping back not just a choice, but a necessity. Today, John Deacon's wealth is estimated at more than £130 million, yet he lives without the trappings of most rock stars. No mansions scattered across the globe, no yachts, no headlines. His life is defined not by fame, but by the silence he chose nearly 30 years ago. That silence has become his statement, proving that sometimes the boldest act is to walk away and never look back.